And I'm going to call some witnesses. Okay, Marie Laporte, Kirsten Hoffman, Catherine Latar, Judith Fulton, Jeremy Tidd, Jesse Billiff. Okay, who else here? Okay, if I called you, come on up. Okay, Senator Brooks, why don't you start? Senate Bill 915.
Lamar, is this on? Okay, I guess it is. Okay. Thanks, Chair Feldman, the Vice Chair Hagan, members of my awesome committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you on Senate Bill 915, the Biodiversity and Agricultural Protection Act. For the record, I'm Senator Ben Brooks, representing the 10th Legislative District in Baltimore County. The purpose of this bill is to increase the number of invasive plant species banned from sale and propagation in the state by streamlining the process for assessing them. In 2011, the state enacted HB 831 to control the spread of invasive plants in Maryland. These non-indigenous plants are assessed under a two-tier system. Tier 1 plants that are deemed prohibited, while Tier 2 plants require a warning label at the time of sale. Despite the rapid spread of invasive in the state, there hasn't been an invasive plant assessment since 2019, and only 6 plants have been prohibited under Tier 1, and 13 have been listed under Tier 2. Moreover, the 2011 law also did not address aquatic plants or species not considered commercial in Maryland. These gaps are jeopardizing Maryland's ecosystem, and it's crucial that we rectify these issues with SB 915. The intent of the bill is to, 1, prohibit harmful invasive plants from being propagated, purchased, or sold in Maryland. 2, adopt a more rapid status assessment protocol to maximize eradication and management costs incurred by the state later. 3, combine a 2-tier system of classifying invasive plant into a single prohibited list after plants have been reassessed. The bill, as amended, codifies the existing reasonable transition period to minimize economic impact to the nursery trade. And 4, add aquatic plants to the invasive plants regulations. As amended, we have addressed the concerns of stakeholders, including the Department of Agriculture, State Highway Administration, Department of Natural Resources, and Maryland nurseries. The governor's bill also contains funding for 3 additional agricultural department staff positions specifically assigned to the program to carry out the existing law. The additional staffing, combined with the streamlined assessment process, will allow Maryland the opportunity to address these nuisance plants efficiently and effectively. Working with the Maryland Green Industrial Council, which represents nursery growers, we have added amendments to clarify the plant on these invasive lists must be evaluated based on the status assessment. Moreover, the amendments also clarify that the Invasive Plant Advisory Committee and the Secretary of Agriculture maintain the authority to recommend their placement on the prohibited plant list. Additionally, the amendments allow them to deregulate sterile cultivars. Further, the amendment addresses the fiscal concern raised by the State Highway Administration by allowing the Secretary of Agriculture and the SHA to collectively agree on how to dispose of banned plants. Overall, invasive plants have a huge impact on our state's economy, agriculture, and health and well-being of our constituents. The economic impact of invasive plants species in Maryland is substantial. Thus, the significant reducing productivity in key sectors and requires huge sums of ongoing effort to manage and mitigate these impacts. For example, the DNR has spent about $1 million in 2014 to control one invasive species, hydrilla, in one location, Deep Creek Lake. Invasive plants also have a serious impact on agriculture. Crops yield are reduced by 12% due to invasive plants, despite the $6.6 billion spent annually on pesticides, which are harmful to workers and to the environment. Finally, a Virginia farmer has submitted compelling testimony that a neighbor's ornamental planting of an invasive fountain grass has spread over to his 225 acres of pasture, which he raises Angus cattle. In just a few years, it has covered 25 to 30% of his field. He is now facing the possibility of closure due to the nuisance grass invasion. Some invasive plants have a direct impact on human health and health costs. Japanese barberry is a host for mice and black-legged ticks that carries Lyme disease. Where there is greater infestation of barberry, there's a greater spread of the infection, which that impacts human, equine, and canine health, and as well as livestock. In fact, the Department of Defense even considers this to be a threat to military readiness. The first step is to protect Maryland native species of our biosphere and is to prohibit these plants, which impact the health and existence of critical pollinators and flora. SB 915 will accomplish this and help farmers, winemakers, and recreational industry. The bill will also bring much needed relief to public and private property owners, managers, despite the expanding labor and herbicide costs each year. They struggle to contain these invasive plants on private property and in our parks. It is imperative that we enact and update invasive species assessment protocol to manage and control invasive plant species in Maryland effectively. Considering these fundamental and cost biodiversity concerns to both the environment and the economy, I strongly urge a favorable report on SB 915.
Okay, let's go to the panel. Why don't you start right in the middle with the mic, and then we'll just go. Tell us who you are. You've got everybody's got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. I'm Marie Laporte, speaking on behalf of the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club and its 70,000 members and supporters in favor of SB 915. While native plants are always the best choice to protect Maryland's wildlife and plants, few non-natives become invasive, just 6%. However, for the plants that do become invasive, their impact is frequently devastating to our biodiversity and costly to agriculture, property owners, and local government. Invasive plants cause harm in many different ways. Some invasive plants like barberry and Japanese silkgrass alter the soil, which can kill native plant species. Invasive vines strangle and topple our trees. Other invaders crowd out native plants and can completely cover everything in their path. While this happens, the wildlife that depend on the native plant become threatened. Maryland wildlife has co-evolved with our native plants for over millennia. Most do not adapt when their food and habitat is eradicated within mere decades. Some invasive plants are toxic to our wildlife. Songbirds that consume nandina berries can be poisoned by the cyanide they contain. Garlic mustard kills the native caterpillars that feed on it. And hydrilla, an aquatic invader that impedes boat traffic, cuts oxygen levels in water and hosts bacteria that poisons birds that consume it. This poison can move up the food chain and has even killed bald eagles. Invasive species have contributed solely or alongside other drivers to 60% of the animal and plant extinctions across the globe. Further, due to increased trade, human travel, and climate change, the spread of invasives is accelerating. We must do more to address this quickly growing threat. We urge a favorable report on SB 915. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, tell us who you are.
Chair Feldman and honorable members of the committee, Kirsten Hoffman for the Greenhouse Alliance and the Maryland Native Plant Coalition. I asked for a favorable report for SB 915, which updates and strengthens Maryland's invasive plant laws to better respond to extensive environmental and economic damage invasive plants are causing in our state. With a simple walk in the park or drive down one of our roadways, you will undoubtedly see damage being caused by invasive plants. To better understand which invasive plants Maryland citizens are most concerned with, the Maryland Native Plant Coalition conducted a survey asking people to identify their top 25 most problematic invasive plants. In just a few weeks' time, we received over 1,400 responses from a public that's incredibly frustrated with the destruction they're seeing from invasive plants. Survey respondents came from all regions of our state, from home gardeners to foresters, weed warriors to landscape professionals. They all had similar sentiments, namely, they're spending significant time and money to deal with out-of-control invasive plants where they live, work, and recreate. The most problematic plant in our survey was English ivy, which climbs trees and eventually will smother and kill a tree if not removed. These vines are causing great destruction in our forest, overwhelming trees, and even carpeting the forest floor so new tree seedlings can't germinate. Recent studies are showing that the combined effects of forest fragmentation with the rising temperatures due to climate change are like a 1-2 punch to our forest, with these conditions favoring vines over trees. As Maryland has the goal of increasing our forest canopy, we will fail if we can't control invasive vines. Japanese barberry, a Maryland Tier 2 invasive plant, also ranked very high in our survey. This shrub's dense growth creates a humid, shady microhabitat that supports black-legged ticks that carry the Lyme disease pathogen. The more barberry in an area, the more Lyme disease. Many of our survey respondents asked, could you please help stop the sale of the most problematic invasive plants? And with your help, the answer is yes. I urge a favorable report to SB 915.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Judy Fulton, Vice President of the Maryland Native Plant Society and an invasive plant expert. We are in favor of Senate Bill 915 because it helps protect the health of the environment, Marylanders, and the economy. Delegate Foley, the House sponsor, just called me a few minutes ago and asked me to say that the Natural Resources and Agricultural Subcommittee has passed the bill and it will be voted on in the full ENT committee this week. This is a good bill. It simplifies implementation of our current law and makes it more effective. SB 915 will speed up the process of keeping the worst invasives from being grown and sold. This bill improves on the existing law by updating technical components. In the interest of time, I won't repeat what Senator Brooks said, but please let me know if you have questions about what's in the bill. I will spend a couple of minutes, though, on going over what this bill keeps, because these are important parts of the existing law and regs. All suspect plants must undergo professional assessments before being prohibited. The nursery trade can sell existing inventory during a phase-in period so that they won't lose money. Varieties developed for characteristics like color and size can be sold if sterile. All assessments are still vetted by the Invasive Plant Advisory Committee. Recently, I talked with cattle farmer Billy Paul. He asked us to compare the small profit a nursery got from selling his neighbor a few invasive ornamental grasses versus all Billy Paul's pastures now being invaded by the plants and his livestock business possibly going under. A new scientific report predicts costs of invasive species will quadruple every 10 years. We need to act now. The Maryland Native Plant Society urges a favorable report on SB 915.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the other end of the table.
Thank you, Chair Feldman, members of the committee. My name is Jesse Iliff. I'm Executive Director of the Severn River Association here in support of Senate Bill 915. From the water quality advocacy point of view, invasive species management is important because these vines, when they choke out trees, will reduce the infiltrative capacity that tree roots have. The vines and other invasives generally have much shallower tree roots, so they don't provide that same service. When the trees are by a stream, the loss of them will result in more sunlight hitting the streams and causing warming water, which is bad for water quality. And there is emerging evidence that a lot of these invasive species can cause alterations in soil chemistry, which can damage mycorrhizal networks and reduce soil's capacity to absorb and treat stormwater. So for all of those reasons, coming from the watershed advocacy perspective, we urge a favorable report for Senate Bill 915.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak and for your service to our state. I'm Katie Lauder, the Executive Director of Baltimore Green Space, a land trust for community managed open spaces. We strongly urge a favorable report for SB 915. Baltimore Green Space is a national thought leader in community managed forest patches. Our research revealed that forest patches outside of parks on land that can be bought and sold make up 20% of Baltimore City's tree canopy, containing more than 85% native trees. However, invasive plant species also blanket forest floors, suppressing the growth of the next generation of forests. If there are no seedlings to replace aging trees, the canopy will age out with no successors. Many forest patches also have invasive vines ascending into the canopy, smothering ancient trees. This is a serious air quality and public health issue. Additionally, recent studies show significant cooling differences in healthy forests compared to forests with high level of invasives. Highly invaded forests were measurably and notably hotter. In partnership with UMBC and the U.S. Forest Service, we conducted research in 47 patches with 845 points of data. More than half of the sampled areas contained less than 25% native species, with the most extensive coverage being by English ivy. English ivy, still for sale at the largest box stores, Home Depot and Lowe's, is the #1 invader in Baltimore City's forests. The laws concerning invasives are not currently strong enough. The Invasive Species Council lists nearly 250 invasives, with only 6 excluded for sale. While the current methodology is scientifically sound, it is not cost or time efficient. Assessors would need at least 15 years to assess the invasive species listed as concerns should the law remain unchanged. SB 915 will implement a vetted methodology that provides a more rapid response and is currently used in at least 7 other states. Now more than ever, when climate change is changing ecologies faster than it can be tracked, we need efficient response systems. We once again urge a favorable report for SB 915.
Sir, like clean up here on the pen.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Tidd, and I'm strongly advocating for the passage of SB 915. In my 20+ years of horticultural industry work, I've witnessed firsthand the detrimental impact invasive plants have on our environment and economy. During my early years at a conventional plant nursery, I saw people's desire to connect with nature through landscape. They would come in with the best of intentions to steward their land and often leave with invasive plants in hand. Those customers rely on nurseries to sell them plants that enhance their property, and all too often leave with plants that not only take over their properties, but also wreak havoc on the surrounding community. It requires expertise to determine if plants are going to be invasive, and only a small fraction of consumers have that expertise. This bill will provide consumer protection. As a landscape contractor, I've worked on thousands of gardens. Every single property I've worked on had been negatively impacted in some way by invasive species, whether homeowners inherited these problems or inadvertently caused them. Many clients were overwhelmed or didn't fully grasp the importance of addressing the issue. Others simply couldn't afford to fix the problem someone else created. A science-based Maryland state list of invasive plant species would provide a crucial resource for contractors, guiding clients towards informed decisions and help mitigate hidden expenses being passed to future property owners. As an owner of a native plant nursery in Maryland, invasives take my time and divert my clients' resources before they even come through the door. 50% of the time it takes to establish a new production garden in my nursery goes to removing invasives. Once established, controlling invasives continues to consume 50% of my maintenance budget, which significantly impacts retail prices, my ability to scale up my business, and the effectiveness of my efforts to provide native plants. The passage of this bill is an essential step towards protecting Maryland's environment, economy, and native biodiversity. By banning invasive plants, we can mitigate their harmful effects, preserve native ecosystems, and guide other businesses towards sustainable practices that are becoming increasingly more important for their success.
Okay, thank you. Before we take questions, we do have a virtual witness, Ashley Bowers, who's actually one of the sponsors panelists. So Ms. Bowers, you've got 2 minutes, then we'll open up to any member. So go on, 2 minutes.
Wonderful. Good evening, Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, our very own Senator Washington, and members of the committee. My name is Ashley Bowers, Environmental Policy Analyst for Baltimore City Recreation and Parks. We urge a favorable report for Bill 915. Our agency, recognized nationwide as a leader in urban forest management, is responsible for stewarding over 2,300 acres of natural areas across Baltimore City. These forests, stream valleys, and wetlands provide essential public health benefits and ecosystem services to our communities, but they face significant threats. Given the rapid rate that non-native invasive plants can dominate native plant communities, our projections for restoring ecosystem health and functionality often look bleak. Scientific consensus is clear that the best chance we have at maintaining resilient natural areas in our communities comes down to two things: preventing disturbance of these landscapes to begin with, and slowing the rate of invasive plant infestations. Since 2019, we've invested over $300,000 to combat invasives while only scratching the surface of the overall need for removals. Unaddressed, all 13 of Maryland's Tier 2 species run rampant in our park system. In addition to our agency's expenditures, every year hundreds of residents attend our educational seminars and log thousands of volunteer hours removing these habitat destroyers from our parks. Finally, we acknowledge the importance of minimizing trade impacts with this bill and want to assure the committee that agencies such as our own are committed to supporting the transition away from invasive species in the nursery industry. Our department annually orders roughly $1.5 million worth of native vegetation, shaping industry demand to enhance and protect biodiversity within the Bay watershed. This bill is vital towards preventing the spread of economically and environmentally harmful species, and we thank you for your considerations.
Okay, any questions for the in-person favorable panel or Ms. Bowers virtually so favorable? Okay, seeing none, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Senator Brooks. We're going to go to, we have 3 witnesses favorable with amendments: John Murphy, Lindsay Thompson, and Rachel Jones. And then we have one unfavorable we'll take up after that. So we've got the 3 witnesses, and Senator Brooks, you can have a seat. These are favorable with amendments panel. And who wants to lead off? Ms. Jones?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, Rachel Jones, Director of Government Relations for MDA. I won't belabor the time. I'll simply say that the bill, MDA supports the bill favorable with amendments. One of the parts of the bill that we particularly like is the part that says that the Invasive Plants Advisory Committee will help to take on some of that burden of evaluating what plants go on the watch list and what plants should be banned. One of the issues with the previous iteration of the bill is that it was an unfunded mandate. So while there's currently a law in place for the Tier 1 and the Tier 2, MDA has not had the pins essentially to be able to effectively go to every nursery in the state and inspect and make sure that there is signage that informs people of what plants are Tier 2. And so we have requested funding in the FY25 budget to be able to cover the pins for this position, and this version of the bill and creating the watch list and removing the Tier 1 and Tier 2 is going to be much more effective for MDA and how we implement this program. And as it's already been stated, will help to ensure that there is not encroachment on native plants and native species and their food sources. And with that, MDA requests a favorable report.
Okay, Ms. Thompson, why don't you go next?
Good evening again. I'm here on behalf, Lindsay Thompson, on behalf of the Maryland Green Industries Council, which represents the nurseries, landscape, greenhouse, arborist, and pest industry. And first, I wanted to thank the sponsor as well as the advocates for approaching us with this bill well in advance of session so that we were able to work through our differences and come to a favorable with amendments position. The amendments that we proposed and were accepted, and the version that just passed out of the Natural Resources and Ag Committee, address the issue of ensuring that all of the plants continue to go through the risk assessment process and are approved for placement on the prohibited list or the watch list by the Invasive Plant Advisory Committee, as well as the Secretary of Agriculture, and ensuring that there's sufficient time for the nursery growers who are currently growing Tier 2 plants, as well as the cultivars of those plants, which would be impacted by this legislation, have time to transition
or those cultivars have the time to go through what is called the infrataxon protocol, which basically just means proving that they are sterile and can continue to be grown and sold. And so with that, I would urge your favorable with amendments report.
Mr. Murphy?
Very good. This one, politics works. Two sides get together and come up with a plan that will work. I'm John Murphy, Chairman of MAGIC, Maryland Green Industry Council. As Lindsay had pointed out, Frederick County Landscape Contractor Association, Maryland Nursery Landscape Greenhouse Growers Association, that's a mouthful. The Arborist Association, and also MAGI, which is the Maryland Green. Thank you. So many acronyms. Yeah, this bill we worked on, we were favorable support to it with the amendments on it. I just want to point one thing out, that I think we all know the Honeycrisp apple. Very good, delicious. I grew up as a young man up in New York, and malice, which is the apple tree in Latin, can be invasive. It can take over areas, maybe abandoned fields, hedgerows, areas that's been worked and opened up. It can be invasive. It is a species, malice. This Honeycrisp is a cultivar. And typically cultivars aren't strong. They're not as strong as an invasive plant. The ability of them taking over a field or a hedgerow or much less. And look at the rewards we got off the Honeycrisp. We all know the Honeycrisp. So that's one of the big things in our industry to save our cultivars. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Take questions. We're going to go with Senator Hester.
Thank you very much for being here tonight. I'm just trying to understand what this does to the noxious weeds part of the ag code. Nothing. So have you guys read the State Highway Administration letter of information? You're working through that. Okay, so we don't have the so I'm hearing that the amendments address the state highways concerns. Yes. Okay, if we could get a copy of the amendments, that would be great. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take care of it. We'll take care of it. Okay. Any additional questions from any of the members? Okay, seeing none, we have one final, thank you for your testimony. We have one final witness for today, John Marshall, who has signed up unfavorable. Is Mr. Marshall? Mr. Marshall, you are the lone witness on the unfavorable table.
Holding up everything.
And the final witness of our 131
Far be it from me to keep us here any longer. John Marshall, my son and I operate a wholesale nursery in Wycomico County. I am opposed to the bill only because the amendments that have been offered are good and get us close to where I think we need to be in our industry. The part of that has not been addressed through this is the sale of our production to other states. We sell into 12 states outside of Maryland. Probably 75% of our production goes out of state. If some of these banned items are still being sold in New York State or Massachusetts or Rhode Island or whatever, and I am restricted from growing them in the state, I will lose sales to other states, North Carolina, Virginia, producers that will be too happy to take my production. So that's one thing that still needs to be addressed in this bill is production of these items for sale out of Maryland. Thank you.
Any question for what? Well, we're going to see if there are any questions. Okay, seeing none. Thank you, sir, for your testimony. That concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 915. That concludes our long bill hearing day, 131 witnesses. Real quick, I met a few of you weren't here this morning. I just want to make a couple quick points. So we had 337 Senate bills assigned to this committee. And when we get through Friday, with the exception of one bill from Senator Hester that we had to move from yesterday next week, we will have completed all our obligations about every bill getting a hearing. And so, you know, over 300. After Friday, we will be done with Senate bills with the exception of one loose end. So that's quite an accomplishment. I have to just say that. So we're going to pivot. So next week, when you start looking at you're not going to see almost anything on the schedule, exception